Catherine Rivera had always believed that love was supposed to feel like coming home, but as she sat on the edge of Laura Wood's bed, her hand pressed against the steady rhythm beneath Laura's ribcage, she realized she had been homeless her entire life until this moment. The whispered words still hung in the air between them like a bridge neither had been ready to cross, yet here they were, trembling on the other side of everything they thought they knew about themselves. "Stay tonight," Laura had whispered, and then she had done something that changed the trajectory of Catherine's entire existence. She had taken Catherine's trembling hand and placed it directly over her heart, as if to say without words that this was real. This was happening. This was the truth they had been dancing around for months. Catherine felt the rapid flutter beneath her palm and knew that Laura was just as terrified and exhilarated as she was. The heart beneath her hand was racing, matching the frantic pace of her own, and in that synchronicity, Catherine found a kind of peace she had never experienced before. This was what she had been searching for in all those failed relationships, all those nights lying awake wondering why nothing ever felt quite right. "I can feel how scared you are," Catherine whispered, her thumb unconsciously tracing small circles over Laura's collarbone. "But I can also feel how sure you are." Laura's eyes fluttered closed, and when she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said, her voice barely audible in the soft light filtering through the bedroom windows. "And I've never been more terrified." Catherine understood completely. The fear was there, sharp and real, but underneath it was something else entirely, something that felt like recognition, like coming alive after years of sleepwalking through her own life. She had spent so long being the supportive friend, the one who listened to Laura's relationship troubles and offered advice while her own heart was slowly breaking. She had become an expert at hiding her feelings, at pretending that the ache in her chest was normal, that everyone felt this hollow when they watched the person they loved with someone else. But now, with Laura's heart beating against her palm and Laura's eyes looking at her like she was the answer to a question Laura hadn't known she was asking, Catherine felt the walls she had built around herself beginning to crumble. "How did we get here?" Laura asked softly, and Catherine knew she wasn't just talking about tonight. She was talking about the months of charged glances and lingering touches, the conversations that went deeper than friendship should allow, the way they had been orbiting each other like binary stars, caught in each other's gravitational pull, but afraid to acknowledge what that meant. Catherine smiled, her hand still pressed against Laura's chest, feeling the steady rhythm that had become her anchor. "Let me tell you," she said, and as she began to speak, she could see it all unfolding again in her mind, like a movie she had watched 1,000 times but was only now beginning to understand. It had started 6 months earlier, though Catherine now realized it had probably been building long before that. She had been Laura's friend for 2 years, ever since they had met at a bookstore reading where they had both reached for the same book and ended up talking for 3 hours over coffee. Catherine had fallen in love with Laura's laugh first, the way it bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her and made everyone in the vicinity want to smile. She had fallen in love with Laura's mind second, the way she could make connections between seemingly unrelated things and find beauty in the most ordinary moments. But she had kept those feelings locked away, buried so deep that sometimes she could almost convince herself they weren't real. Laura had a boyfriend after all. David Ramirez was handsome and charming and everything that society said Laura should want. Catherine had no right to feel the way she did, no right to hope for something that could never happen. So she had become the perfect friend instead. She listened when Laura complained about David's inability to understand her need for space. She offered advice when Laura felt like something was missing from their relationship, but couldn't put her finger on what. She held Laura when she cried after fights and celebrated with her when things were good, all while feeling like she was slowly dying inside. The first crack in Catherine's carefully constructed facade had come on a rainy Thursday evening in March. Laura had shown up at Catherine's apartment, soaked to the bone and shivering, having walked 12 blocks in the downpour after another fight with David. "I don't understand what's wrong with me," Laura had said, accepting the towel Catherine offered and sinking onto the couch. "He's a good guy. He loves me. He wants to marry me. So why do I feel like I'm suffocating?" Catherine had made tea and listened, as she always did, but something was different that night. Maybe it was the way Laura looked in the soft lamplight, her hair damp and curling around her face, her usual composure stripped away to reveal something raw and vulnerable underneath. Maybe it was the way Laura kept looking at her while she talked, as if Catherine held the answers to all her questions. "What do you think love is supposed to feel like?" Laura had asked suddenly, and the question had hit Catherine like a physical blow. Catherine had stared at her for a long moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I think," she had said carefully, "that love is supposed to feel like coming home, like you can finally stop pretending to be someone you're not." Laura had gone very still, her teacup halfway to her lips. "And what if you don't know who you really are?" "Then maybe," Catherine had whispered, "you need to find someone who sees you clearly enough to reflect yourself back to you." They had stared at each other across the coffee table, and Catherine had felt something shift in the air between them. It was subtle, like the moment before a storm when the pressure changes, and you know something is coming even if you can't see it yet. Laura had stayed until nearly midnight that night, and when she finally left, she had hugged Catherine longer than usual, her face buried in Catherine's neck, in a way that made Catherine's skin tingle for hours afterward. That had been the beginning, though Catherine hadn't recognized it at the time. In the weeks that followed, Laura had started coming over more often. She would show up with takeout and a bottle of wine, claiming she needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere of her shared apartment with David. They would talk for hours, about books and dreams and the strange ways life never turned out the way you expected. Catherine had started to notice things she had trained herself not to see before. The way Laura's eyes would linger on her face when she thought Catherine wasn't looking. The way Laura would find excuses to touch her, brushing imaginary lint off her sweater or playing with her hair while they watched movies. The way Laura would curl up next to her on the couch, getting closer and closer until they were pressed together from shoulder to knee, and how Laura never seemed to want to move away. One evening in April, they had been lying on Catherine's bed, supposedly reading, but really just enjoying each other's company, in the comfortable silence they had perfected over 2 years of friendship. Laura had been on her stomach, propped up on her elbows with a book spread in front of her, but Catherine had noticed that she hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. "What are you thinking about?" Catherine had asked softly. Laura had rolled onto her side to face her, the book forgotten. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" The question had been so close to Catherine's own constant internal struggle that she had felt her breath catch. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Laura had said, her fingers playing absently with the edge of Catherine's pillowcase, "do you ever feel like you're just going through the motions? Like you're playing a role that everyone expects you to play, but inside you feel like a stranger to yourself?" Catherine had wanted to tell her the truth then. She had wanted to say that she felt exactly like that every day, that she had been living a lie for so long she sometimes forgot what her real feelings looked like. Instead, she had reached out and brushed a strand of hair away from Laura's face, marveling at the way Laura's eyes fluttered closed at the gentle touch. "I think everyone feels that way sometimes," Catherine had said, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "The question is what you do about it." Laura had opened her eyes and looked at Catherine with an intensity that made her heart skip. "What would you do?" "If you were me?" Catherine had stared at her, acutely aware of how close they were, how easy it would be to close the distance between them and kiss Laura the way she had been dreaming about for months. Instead, she had forced herself to be the good friend, the supportive confidant who put Laura's happiness above her own desires. "I think," she had said carefully, "that you need to figure out what makes you happy. Really happy. Not what other people think should make you happy, but what actually lights you up inside." Laura had been quiet for a long time after that, her gaze never leaving Catherine's face. Finally, she had whispered, "What if what makes me happy is something I never expected? Something that doesn't make sense?" Catherine's heart had started racing, but she had kept her voice steady. "Then maybe it makes more sense than you think." They had fallen asleep like that, facing each other on Catherine's bed, and Catherine had woken up to find Laura's arm draped over her waist and Laura's face inches from her own. For a moment, she had allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to wake up like this every day, to have the right to kiss Laura good morning and tell her how beautiful she looked with her hair mussed and her defenses down. But then, Laura had stirred and opened her eyes, and the moment had shattered like glass. Laura had pulled away quickly, apologizing for invading Catherine's space, and Catherine had assured her it was fine even as her heart broke a little more. That pattern had continued through the spring and into the summer. Laura would push the boundaries of their friendship just far enough to make Catherine hope, and then she would retreat, leaving Catherine to wonder if she had imagined the whole thing. It was an exquisite kind of torture, being so close to what she wanted but unable to reach for it. The turning point had come in July, on a night that started like so many others but ended up changing everything. Laura had arrived at Catherine's apartment in tears, having finally broken up with David after a fight that had been building for months. "I couldn't do it anymore," Laura had sobbed into Catherine's shoulder. "I couldn't keep pretending that I was happy when every day felt like I was slowly disappearing." Catherine had held her and let her cry, stroking her hair and murmuring soothing words, while her own heart ached with a mixture of sympathy and selfish hope. When Laura's tears had finally subsided, they had settled on the couch with a bottle of wine, and Laura had started talking in a way Catherine had never heard before. "The worst part," Laura had said, her voice raw from crying, "is that he's not a bad person. He didn't do anything wrong. I just felt like I was suffocating every time he touched me, like I was wearing a costume that didn't fit. And the more he tried to love me the way he thought I wanted to be loved, the more trapped I felt." Catherine had poured them both another glass of wine, her hands trembling slightly. "What kind of love do you want?" she had asked, though she wasn't sure she was ready for the answer. Laura had looked at her for a long moment, her eyes bright with wine and unshed tears. "I want the kind of love that feels like freedom," she had said finally. "I want to be with someone who sees all the messy, complicated parts of me and doesn't try to fix them or change them. I want someone who makes me feel more like myself, not less." "That sounds beautiful," Catherine had whispered, and she had meant it even though the words felt like knives in her chest. "I think," Laura had said, her voice getting softer, "that I want to be with someone who already knows me, someone I don't have to explain myself to because they've been paying attention all along." Catherine had felt her breath catch, but she had forced herself not to read too much into Laura's words. She had been disappointed too many times before to let herself hope. But then Laura had done something that changed everything. She had reached across the couch and taken Catherine's hand, intertwining their fingers in a way that felt deliberate and significant. "Catherine," she had said, and there was something in the way she said her name that made Catherine's heart start racing. "Can I ask you something?" Catherine had nodded, not trusting her voice. "Have you ever wondered what it would be like to kiss a woman?" The question had hit Catherine like lightning, illuminating everything she had been trying to hide. She had stared at Laura, searching her face for any sign that this was still hypothetical, still safe. "Why are you asking?" Catherine had managed to say. Laura's grip on her hand had tightened. "Because I have been. Wondering, I mean, and not just any woman." Her voice had dropped to barely a whisper. Catherine had felt the world tilt on its axis. Everything she thought she knew about their friendship, about Laura's sexuality, about the possibility of her feelings being reciprocated, had suddenly shifted into a new configuration. "Laura," she had breathed, and she had heard the longing in her own voice, the hope she had been trying so hard to suppress. "I know it's crazy," Laura had rushed to say. "I know it doesn't make sense. I've never felt this way about a woman before, but I can't stop thinking about you, about us, about what it might be like if we stopped pretending that what we have is just friendship." Catherine had stared at her, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "How long have you been thinking about this?" "Months," Laura had admitted. "Maybe longer. I kept telling myself it was just because I was unhappy with David, that I was projecting or confused or going through some kind of crisis. But even after we broke up, the feelings didn't go away. If anything, they got stronger." Catherine had felt tears start to build behind her eyes. "Laura, I need to tell you something." "What?" Catherine had taken a shaky breath, knowing that whatever she said next would change everything between them forever. "I've been in love with you for 2 years." The silence that followed had been deafening. Laura had gone very still, her eyes wide with shock, and Catherine had felt her heart start to break all over again. She had finally said it, finally told the truth, and now she was going to lose the most important person in her life. But then Laura had launched herself across the couch and kissed her. It hadn't been a gentle, tentative first kiss. It had been desperate and hungry and full of 2 years' worth of suppressed longing. Catherine had kissed her back with everything she had, pouring all her hidden feelings into the connection between their lips, tasting the salt of Laura's tears and the wine on her breath. When they had finally broken apart, both breathing hard, Laura had rested her forehead against Catherine's and whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you had a boyfriend," Catherine had said simply. "Because I thought I was protecting our friendship. Because I was terrified of losing you." "You could never lose me," Laura had said fiercely. "Don't you understand? You're the most important person in my life. You always have been." They had kissed again, slower this time, exploratory and wondering. Catherine had marveled at the softness of Laura's lips, the way she tasted like everything Catherine had been craving without knowing it. When Laura had pulled back and suggested they move to the bedroom, Catherine had felt her heart nearly stop. "Are you sure?" Catherine had asked, searching Laura's face for any sign of doubt. "I've never been more sure of anything," Laura had replied, and the conviction in her voice had been enough to silence Catherine's fears. They had made love that night with a tenderness that took Catherine's breath away. Laura had touched her like she was something precious, something to be cherished, and Catherine had responded with a passion she hadn't known she was capable of. Afterward, they had lain tangled together in Catherine's bed, talking in whispers about everything that had led them to this moment. "I can't believe how blind I was," Laura had said, tracing patterns on Catherine's bare shoulder. "Looking back, I can see it so clearly now. The way I always wanted to be near you, the way I compared every relationship to what we had and found them lacking. I was measuring everyone against you without even realizing it." Catherine had pressed a kiss to Laura's temple, still hardly believing that this was real. "I thought I was going crazy," she had admitted, "falling in love with my straight best friend who had a boyfriend. I felt like such a cliché." "I don't think I was ever really straight," Laura had said thoughtfully. "I think I was just doing what was expected of me, following the script I thought I was supposed to follow. But being with you feels like the first honest thing I've ever done." They had talked until dawn, sharing fears and hopes and dreams they had never dared voice before. Catherine had told Laura about the years of longing, the way she had trained herself to be content with friendship while dying inside. Laura had talked about her growing awareness that she was living someone else's life, the way she had started to question everything she thought she knew about herself. "What happens now?" Catherine had asked as the sun started to filter through the bedroom windows. Laura had turned to face her, her eyes serious but warm. "Now we figure it out together," she had said. "I know it won't be easy. I know there will be people who don't understand, who think this came out of nowhere. But Catherine, what I feel for you isn't going anywhere. This isn't some experiment or phase. This is real." Catherine had felt tears of relief and joy start to spill down her cheeks. "I love you," she had whispered. "I love you so much it scares me." "I love you too," Laura had replied, and hearing those words had felt like coming alive after years of holding her breath. The months that followed had been a whirlwind of discovery and adjustment. Laura had moved out of the apartment she had shared with David and into Catherine's place, claiming she needed time to figure things out, but really because neither of them could bear to be apart. They had navigated the awkward conversations with friends and family, some of whom were surprised but supportive, others who needed time to adjust to this new reality. David had been hurt and confused, but ultimately he had wished them well, admitting that he had sensed Laura pulling away long before their relationship ended. "I always felt like she was thinking about someone else," he had told Catherine when they ran into each other at a coffee shop months later. "I just never imagined it was you." Catherine's parents had been surprisingly accepting, her mother admitting that she had always thought there was something special about Catherine's friendship with Laura. Laura's family had taken longer to come around, but eventually they had seen how happy their daughter was and had welcomed Catherine with open arms. But the real work had been internal, learning to trust in their love and believe that they deserved this happiness. Catherine had struggled with guilt over the years. She had spent hiding her feelings, wondering if she had wasted precious time they could have had together. Laura had grappled with questions about her identity, wondering if she had been lying to herself her entire life, or if love was simply more fluid than she had ever imagined. They had worked through it together, with patience and understanding, and a love that seemed to grow stronger every day. They had learned each other's bodies and minds and hearts with the dedication of scholars, mapping every preference and fear and dream. Catherine had discovered that Laura liked to be the big spoon despite being shorter, that she hummed unconsciously when she was content, that she cried at commercials but never at movies. Laura had learned that Catherine needed coffee before conversation in the morning, that she had a secret talent for singing harmony, that she kept a journal where she wrote letters to her future self. They had created new traditions and rituals, Sunday morning pancakes and evening walks around the neighborhood, and lazy Saturday afternoons spent reading in bed. Catherine had introduced Laura to her favorite bookstores and hiking trails, while Laura had taught Catherine to cook and appreciate art museums and find joy in small moments. The sex had been a revelation for both of them. Catherine had thought she understood desire, but being with Laura had shown her the difference between wanting someone and needing them like air. Laura had discovered that physical intimacy could be about connection rather than performance, that her body could be a source of joy rather than anxiety. They had learned to communicate their needs and desires without shame, to ask for what they wanted and give what was needed. But it was the emotional intimacy that had truly transformed them both. Catherine had learned to accept love without constantly waiting for it to be taken away. Laura had discovered who she was when she stopped trying to be who she thought she should be. Together, they had created a relationship based on honesty and acceptance, and the kind of deep understanding that comes from truly seeing another person. Now, 6 months after that first kiss, Catherine found herself back where the story had started, in Laura's bedroom with her hand pressed against Laura's heart, marveling at how far they had come. "Stay tonight," Laura had whispered again, even though Catherine hadn't been planning to leave, even though this was their shared bedroom now in the apartment they had found together last month. It had become a ritual between them, this request that wasn't really a request but a reaffirmation of their choice to build a life together. "Always," Catherine had replied, as she always did, and she had meant it with every fiber of her being. Laura had smiled and pulled Catherine down for a kiss that tasted like toothpaste and promises. "I still can't believe this is real sometimes," she had murmured against Catherine's lips. "What part?" Catherine had asked, settling more comfortably against Laura's side. "All of it. The fact that you loved me for so long without saying anything. The fact that I was so blind to my own feelings. The fact that we found each other despite all the ways we could have missed this." Catherine had traced lazy patterns on Laura's collarbone, thinking about the twists and turns that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever regret it? The time we lost?" Laura had been quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "No," she had said finally. "I think we needed that time. I needed to figure out who I was and what I wanted. You needed to learn to value yourself enough to believe you deserved love. We both had growing to do before we could be ready for this." Catherine had nodded, understanding the wisdom in Laura's words. Their love story hadn't been a straight line from friendship to romance. It had been a spiral, circling closer and closer to the truth until they were finally ready to claim it. "Besides," Laura had added with a mischievous smile, "think of how good the anticipation made that first kiss." Catherine had laughed, remembering the desperate hunger of that moment, the way years of longing had exploded into action. "It was pretty spectacular." "Just pretty spectacular?" Laura had teased, rolling over to pin Catherine beneath her. "I think I need to work on my technique." What followed had been anything but work. They had made love with the easy familiarity of established lovers, but also with the wonder of people who still couldn't quite believe their luck. Catherine had lost herself in the feeling of Laura's skin against hers, the soft sounds Laura made when Catherine touched her in just the right way, the way Laura whispered her name like a prayer. Afterward, they had lain entwined in the darkness, listening to each other breathe and feeling grateful for the ordinary miracle of being together. "Catherine?" Laura had said softly. Thank you." "For what?" "For waiting. For being patient with me while I figured myself out. For loving me even when I was too scared to love you back." Catherine had pressed a kiss to Laura's shoulder, tasting salt and sweetness. "Thank you for being brave enough to take the leap. For choosing love even when it was scary and complicated and didn't fit the plan you had for your life. It was the easiest choice I ever made," Laura had said. "Once I stopped fighting it and just let myself feel what I was feeling, everything became clear. You were always the answer, Catherine. I just had to learn the right question." They had drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped around each other like they were afraid one of them might disappear in the night. Catherine had dreamed of golden light and laughter and a future stretching out before them full of possibilities she was finally brave enough to imagine. She had woken to find Laura already up, standing at the window in one of Catherine's old t-shirts, looking out at the city beginning to stir in the early morning light. Catherine had watched her for a moment, struck as always by Laura's beauty, but also by the sense of rightness she felt seeing Laura in their space, wearing her clothes, belonging here in every way that mattered. "Good morning, beautiful," Catherine had said, and Laura had turned with a smile that could have powered the entire city. "Good morning yourself," Laura had replied, padding back to the bed and climbing in beside Catherine. "I was just thinking about how different everything looks now. The same view from the same window, but it's like I'm seeing it through new eyes." Catherine had understood exactly what she meant. Everything in her life had been transformed by love, made brighter and more meaningful by the simple fact of Laura's presence. Colors seemed more vivid, music sounded richer, even mundane tasks like grocery shopping had become adventures when shared with the right person. "Do you want coffee?" Laura had asked, already knowing the answer but asking anyway because she loved taking care of Catherine in small ways. "In a minute," Catherine had said, pulling Laura closer. "I want to stay like this just a little longer." Laura had settled against her with a contented sigh. "We have all the time in the world," she had murmured, and Catherine had felt the truth of those words settle into her bones. They did have time now. Time to build the life they wanted together. Time to explore this love that had surprised them both with its depth and intensity. Time to discover all the ways they could make each other happy. The frantic urgency of those early days had settled into something deeper and more sustainable, a love that was both passionate and peaceful, exciting and comfortable. As Catherine lay there with Laura in her arms, she thought about all the versions of herself she had been before this moment, the lonely child who had never quite fit in anywhere, the teenager who had dated boys because that's what was expected, but never felt the spark everyone else seemed to experience, the young woman who had convinced herself she was broken somehow, destined to love from a distance but never to be truly loved in return. All of those versions of herself had led to this moment, to this love, to this woman who saw her clearly and chose her anyway. Catherine had learned that love wasn't about finding someone who completed you, but about finding someone who inspired you to become the fullest version of yourself. Laura had done that for her, had given her permission to want what she wanted and feel what she felt without apology or shame. "What are you thinking about?" Laura had asked, sensing the shift in Catherine's mood. "Just how grateful I am," Catherine had replied honestly, "for all of it. Even the hard parts, even the waiting and the uncertainty and the fear. It all led us here." Laura had lifted her head to look at Catherine, her eyes soft with understanding. "I used to think that love was supposed to be easy," she had said. "That if you had to work for it or wait for it or fight for it, then it wasn't real. But now I know that the best things in life are worth working for. We're worth working for." Catherine had cupped Laura's face in her hands, marveling at the way Laura leaned into her touch like a flower turning toward the sun. "I love you," she had said, and even though she said those words dozens of times a day now, they still felt momentous every time. "I love you too," Laura had replied, and then she had kissed Catherine with a sweetness that made her heart ache in the best possible way. They had eventually gotten up and made coffee and breakfast, moving around each other in the kitchen with the choreographed ease of people who had learned each other's rhythms. Catherine had watched Laura butter toast and pour orange juice and felt overwhelmed by the simple domesticity of it all. This was what she had been searching for her entire life without knowing it, not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but quiet moments of connection and care. Later that morning, they had gone for a walk through their neighborhood, holding hands and talking about their plans for the weekend, for the month, for the years stretching ahead of them. They had stopped at a farmer's market and bought flowers and fresh bread, playing at being the kind of couple who did normal couple things together. "Look at us," Laura had said, laughing as they struggled to carry all their purchases. "We're so domestic it's almost embarrassing." "I love our domestic," Catherine had replied, and she had meant it completely. After years of feeling like she was on the outside of life looking in, she finally felt like she belonged somewhere, with someone. They had spent the afternoon reading in the park, Laura's head in Catherine's lap while Catherine played with her hair and tried to concentrate on her book. But she kept getting distracted by the feel of Laura's weight against her legs, the way Laura would occasionally read interesting passages aloud, the simple miracle of being able to touch the person she loved whenever she wanted. "We should probably head home soon," Laura had said eventually, though she made no move to get up. "Probably," Catherine had agreed, also making no effort to pack up their things. They had stayed another hour, reluctant to break the spell of the perfect afternoon. When they finally did head home, they had cooked dinner together and watched a movie and talked about everything and nothing until it was time for bed. "Stay tonight," Laura had whispered as they settled under the covers, even though Catherine lived there now, even though her clothes were in the closet and her toothbrush was in the bathroom and her name was on the lease. "Always," Catherine had replied, as she always did, understanding that this wasn't really about logistics but about choice, about the daily decision to build a life together. Laura had taken Catherine's hand and placed it over her heart, as she had taken to doing whenever she wanted to ground them both in the reality of their love. Catherine had felt the steady rhythm beneath her palm and marveled, as she always did, at the fact that this heart belonged to her now, that she was trusted with something so precious. "I can't imagine my life without you anymore," Laura had whispered in the darkness. "Good thing you don't have to," Catherine had whispered back. They had made love again that night, slowly and sweetly, taking their time to explore and appreciate and worship. Catherine had traced the familiar geography of Laura's body with her lips and hands, finding new ways to make Laura gasp and arch and whisper her name. Laura had returned the favor with interest, using her mouth and fingers to remind Catherine that she was cherished, desired, loved beyond measure. Afterward, they had talked in the drowsy, intimate way of lovers who have all the time in the world. They had shared memories and dreams and silly observations about their friends and neighbors. They had made plans for the future and reflected on how far they had come. "Do you think we would have found each other eventually?" Laura had asked. "If things had been different, if we had met under other circumstances?" Catherine had considered the question seriously. "I think so," she had said finally. "I think some connections are inevitable. We might have taken a different path to get here, but I believe we would have ended up in the same place." "I like that," Laura had murmured sleepily. "The idea that we were always meant to find each other." "Me too," Catherine had agreed, though she also believed they had made their own fate through countless small choices and acts of courage. As Laura had drifted off to sleep, Catherine had lain awake for a while longer, thinking about the strange and wonderful journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about the years of friendship, the months of unspoken longing, the night when everything had changed. She thought about the challenges they had faced and overcome, the way they had learned to trust in their love even when the world seemed uncertain. Most of all, she thought about the future stretching out before them, full of possibilities she was finally brave enough to embrace. There would be more challenges, she knew. There would be days when love felt easy and days when it required work. There would be external pressures and internal doubts and all the ordinary struggles that came with building a life with another person. But there would also be mornings like this one, waking up next to the person who knew her better than anyone else in the world. There would be quiet evenings and shared laughter and the deep satisfaction of being truly seen and accepted. There would be adventures and discoveries and the ongoing miracle of growing together instead of growing apart. Catherine had finally fallen asleep with Laura's hand in hers, and Laura's breath warm against her neck, feeling more at peace than she had ever thought possible. She had dreamed of wedding dresses and house keys and children's laughter, of growing old together and looking back on this time as the beginning of their real life. When she woke up the next morning, Laura was already awake, watching her with eyes full of love and mischief. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Laura had said, pressing a kiss to Catherine's forehead. "Morning," Catherine had mumbled, still half asleep but already reaching for Laura, already grateful for another day in this life they had built together. "I made coffee," Laura had said, gesturing toward the bedside table where 2 steaming mugs waited. Catherine had sat up and accepted her mug gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma and feeling her brain start to wake up. "You're perfect," she had said, and she had meant it in every possible way. "I'm really not," Laura had laughed, "but I'm perfect for you, and that's what matters." Catherine had looked at her over the rim of her coffee mug, taking in Laura's sleep-mussed hair and makeup-free face and the old t-shirt she had slept in, and had felt her heart swell with so much love she thought it might burst. "Yes," she had said simply, "you are." They had spent the morning in bed, drinking coffee and talking and making love with the lazy thoroughness of people who had nowhere else to be. Eventually, they had gotten up and showered together and started their day. But even the most mundane activities felt special when shared with the right person. As Catherine had watched Laura get dressed for work, she had marveled again at the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. If Laura hadn't dated David, would she have ever questioned her sexuality? If Catherine hadn't been brave enough to be honest about her feelings, would they have remained friends forever, both of them secretly longing for something more? There were so many ways their story could have gone differently, so many moments when fear could have won out over love. But somehow, despite all the obstacles and complications, they had found their way to each other. They had chosen courage over comfort, truth over safety, love over fear. "What are you smiling about?" Laura had asked, catching Catherine's expression in the mirror as she put on her earrings. "Just thinking about how lucky we are," Catherine had replied. "Lucky?" Laura had turned to face her, eyebrows raised. "I prefer to think of it as destiny." "Maybe it's both," Catherine had said. "Maybe..."